This is GARIS Masculist MGTOW flyers. That is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 404, entitled Details on Women's Career Mother Timeline. That's CMT. Description. This flyer proposes a concrete career mother timeline, CMT, for women that satisfies women's needs to have a career and be a mother of 2 kids. That satisfies men's, that is masculists, needs for women to be FIPs and not parasite of the money and labour of a man. And finally, that satisfies the needs of demographic politicians who ensure that whole populations are not wiped out by keeping the birth rate above 2.1 kids per woman. Flyer itself. A bit bigger. Details on Women's Career Mother Timeline, that's CMT, by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. This flyer presents in some detail my suggestions for women on how, and particularly when, to get an education, to work, to have kids, to work, to retire, etc. That is, advice for women on how to arrange their lives, their life trajectories, their timelines. Masculists like myself put enormous moral pressure on women to FIP up, brackets, become FIPs, equals financially independent persons, close brackets, so that they do not expect to be able to parasite off the money and labour of a man, manslaving him, making him work for a woman for decades, making her an immoral, parasitic manslaver, to be severely punished by men by being left to rot on the shelf, by being totally ignored, not even pumped and dumped, so that her fluffy parasite, in brackets, fluffy, equals a traditional woman who expects to parasite off the money and labour of a man, the opposite of a FIP, close brackets. Genes are removed from the gene pool. Millions of men are now applying these masculine attitudes towards women. For example, I read not so long ago that in the UK, young men care more about the level of fitness of a potential girlfriend than they do about her looks. That is, they do not want to be parasited upon by a bloody fluffy who is not bothered to get a career-competent education so that she can be a real FIP as an adult and not expect to parasite off the money and labour of a man. The feminists have also encouraged young women to have careers and have been doing this for decades longer than the masculists, since second-wave feminism got off the ground in the late 60s, that is, half a century ago, which is something I remember personally since I was a young man in my early 20s at the time of the rise of women's lib. The rise of women's lib, feminism, corresponded and was largely caused by the male invention of the contraceptive pill. So women were able to reliably choose the number of children they wanted, and in practice that was mostly 0, 1 or 2. So since they had a life expectancy well into the 80s, they had a career window of half a century, so streamed into the workforce. Many older feminists now feel that feminism oversold the importance of having a career to younger women, to the point that now there are millions of women who are manless and childless, and hence are very unhappy. Research shows that the unhappiest of women in Western countries are professional women, doctors, dentists, lawyers, etc., in their 40s, single and childless. They are miserable because they feel that they have missed out on life, of not being loved by a man, and especially in not having had kids, which is what women's lives are mostly about. Feminism pushed women to become FIPs for reasons different from what the masculists are saying. The feminists saw female careering as the means for women to obtain financial independence, to escape from being a domestic doormat to a man who controlled her since he earned the money. So feminism provided the carrot of female careerism to women, whereas the masculists provided the stick of female careerism to women, threatening women that if they did not FIP up by bothering to get a career competent education so that they could become a FIP as an adult, then masculisted men would severely punish fluffies by forcing them to rot on the shelf, rejected totally by men, or at least by masculists, which, given the toxicity of today's divorce courts, taken over by the fluffy feminist hypocrites, men and masculists will become synonymous when most men are infected by the masculist virus. So, we have here a double-barreled pressure on women to FIP up from both the feminist and the masculist movements, with mothers encouraging their daughters to have a career, and the daughters being threatened by their male classmates with social and sexual ostracism if they don't have a career, then it's not surprising that young women will come under crushing pressure to FIP up, with everyone telling them to be FIP. Young women are really absorbing this message. I only have to look at my own 3 nieces to see that. 2 of them are such committed careerists and such hotshots in their careers, in brackets, earning in the top 5% of earners, that they have decided that they will not have kids. Both are in their 30s. The problem with female careerism, if it is adopted by women in the same way as men do, is that compromises usually have to be made, since it is a basic practical reality that it is virtually impossible for a young woman to be both a full-time careerist and a mother of very small children at the same time. Women do not have many decades in which it is possible to get pregnant and have kids. Women are fertile from about mid-teens to about mid-30s to 40. That is only 2+ decades. So there's limited time to get well educated, obtain some years of career experience, and have kids. Many women have taken up a lifestyle of going to college until age 21, then screwing around for a decade, having on average, according to recent surveys, some 40 different penises in her by the time she reaches 30. Then her biological clock starts ticking hard, and she realizes that if she's to have kids, she had better change her lifestyle, because her fertility window is closing. She then starts looking around for some gullible, stupid manslave to parasite on, since in about 3/4 of cases, young women chose to become fluffy crappers, that is, chose to study fluffy crap majors at high school and college, ending up with a fluffy crap diploma that does not give her a salary high enough to be able to afford to buy her own middle-class house that she plans to raise her kids in. So she looks for a manslave to pay for her to raise her kids in that middle-class house. If she's a real careerist and not so conscious of her ticking biological clock, then she may continue her careering well into her 30s, then wake up suddenly that her fertility window is truly closing. So she doubles her efforts to find a manslave, but the supply of such manslaves is drying up for several reasons. One is that the MGTOW and masculist movements are teaching men that the fluffy feminist-controlled divorce courts are so toxic for men that modern marriage and paternity really suck, since a married father faces a 1 in 4 chance of losing custody of his kids, so millions of men now reject marriage and paternity. Another reason is that the supply of manslavable men willing to marry her and pay for her, given her age of mid-30s, is slim. since men prefer to marry and give their sperm to women a decade or so younger than these women in their mid-30s. So, many such women in their 30s, with their biological clocks ticking hard in their ears, are effectively left rotting on the shelf, so that even if they do manage to lock down some gullible manslave, they run out of time to have a second kid, since by the time they have been through the process of finding a man, starting at age 35, say, getting him to marry her, plus nearly a year for the pregnancy, then she is in her late 30s, so may be unable to get pregnant again, so is forced to settle for having only one kid. Millions of women don't even have one kid, since they leave finding a manslave and having a kid or two too late. The later they leave finding Mr. Right, or even Mr. Right Now, the lower the odds of actually finding one, since the supply of marriageable men has shrunken right down for reasons similar to those above, but even more so. So, millions of career-oriented women, influenced by feminist ideas, have found themselves single, childless, and too old to become pregnant. Such women are seen by men as being less sexually attractive, since they are now barren. And for obvious Darwinian reasons, men have much less desire to penis them, since there is no reproductive value in a barren, older woman. Many former feminists who have their well-paying careers and yet are manless and childless complain bitterly that feminism has lied to them about the importance of having a career, at the expense of not having a man and children, particularly not having children, which sends millions of women into depression. Now, with the more modern rise of masculism, women are feeling under even more moral pressure to have careers, to FIP up, since men have more persuasive power than women, than feminists, since men are nearly all FIPs, so have the power to force women to FIP up, since a fluffy can only be a fluffy if she can get her financial claws into some gullible manslave. If nearly all men become influenced by masculist ideas, then fluffies will die out, since they will be forced, if they want to eat, to FIP up by getting a well-paid career. So with both the feminist and the masculist movements putting enormous moral pressure on young women to FIP up, to become careerists, what is a young woman to do who really wants to have kids? She has a problem. She has to make tough decisions rather early in her life, since she has a fertility window that is open for only 2 decades or so. Then it closes again and remains closed for the remaining half-century of her life. So women have a hard time juggling career, husband and kids, all in the first half of her life. This flyer is aimed at such women, giving advice, and particularly numbers, that is ages, at which young women ought to be doing various things. For example, when to study, when to marry, when to start a career, when to have kids, when to go back to work, etc. This is the end of part 1.